So good morning, folks. This is the state of digital preservation in Texas, updates and panel presentations, and I am your host, Courtney Muma, TDL's Deputy Director. I am joined by our panelists and moderator, Bethany Scott from the University of Houston today. So for those of you who are lucky enough to be new to Zoom, you will want to make sure that your microphone and video are muted. The presenters will also keep their mics and video muted until it is their turn to present today. If you want to see who else is in attendance, go ahead and click on that participants icon in the bottom center of the screen. And if you have a question or a comment at any time, please type it into the chat and we'll address those at the end. You can access that chat by clicking on that thought bubble there at the bottom right of your screen. I'd like you all to join me in a nice deep breath. TDL would like to remind you that your words, behavior, and attention matter in this space that we're sharing for the next hour and a half today. We will be genuine, candid, and transparent with each other. Over the course of the presentations, please presume positive intentions of the speakers as well as the other attendees who are here with you. Recognize that everyone has expertise and no one has all of the answers. In fact, I don't know is an acceptable answer too. Remember too that you are part of something bigger than yourself or our consortium. Try to be an active and focused listener and show us that with your thoughtful questions. We also encourage laughter and smiling, and I know that our panelists today will give you reason to do just that. So just keep those mics and videos muted for us. We'll know you're laughing. So with that, I want to get to know who's here with us today a bit. And so I'm going to share a few polls with you. I'm going to keep each of these up for about, let's say 30 seconds. So the first one is, tell us about your digital preservation work. And you can check as many of these as apply to you. So digital preservation is your main job duty. It falls under other duties. You don't do digital preservation tasks, but you do supervise others who do. Or maybe you're not responsible at all for digital preservation tasks, but you're here because you're interested in learning more. And again, you can choose more than one of these. Okay, so that's 30 seconds. I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll in just a second here. We've still got people joining, so I wanna make sure that they can jump on and answer this question real quick too. We might even go to a minute. Still got some answers coming in. Looking like digital preservation falling under other duties, unsurprisingly, is winning here. And the main job duty is second. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll. And I'm gonna go ahead and share those results with you. So as you can see, other duties wins, main job duty is second there. I'm really excited that we have some folks here who are just interested in learning more. And we've got some supervisors with us today too, hopefully to see some of the nitty gritty. Alrighty, so we're gonna go ahead and go to question 2. Tell us about your training, and you can check more than one of these as well. Were you trained in archives, libraries, special collections, some sort of IT or DevOps, or have you had some training in any of these areas, but nothing really formal? And since we have most folks here with us, I'm gonna go ahead and leave this one open about 45 seconds before I close it. Unsurprisingly, trained in libraries is coming out ahead. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll. And I'm gonna share the results with you. So yes, trained in libraries and secondary as archives, followed closely by special collections. Again, welcome to those IT and DevOps folks here, and I think we all understand that experience of having training kind of all over the place, especially when you're working on digital preservation tasks. So finally, our last TDL poll here is about TDL specifically. So tell us about your TDL affiliation. How do you know us at Texas Digital Library? Are you a member? Are you not a member, but you're a Texas-based institution? Or are you neither? And again, I'll leave this one open for about 45 seconds. All righty, gonna end that one and share with you. We've got, again, unsurprisingly, a majority of member institutions here. Welcome members, welcome other Texas folks. We hope that that just means you're soon to be members or future members. And if you're not a member also, whoever you are, welcome. We're glad to have you here today. Okay, thanks for doing those. It's helpful to the panelists and to us to know who our attendees are, so we can definitely tailor as we go through the presentation. So today's session will begin, of course, with my overview of digital preservation at the Texas Digital Library. And I'll give some highlights as well from other projects in Texas. Then our panel moderator, Bethany Scott, will share information about the Archivematica Texas Users Group before she invites us into the panel presentation with Shelley Barba, Lauren Goodley, and Kaitlyn Sisk. Following their presentations, we've planned time for questions and discussion, but again, go ahead and add those to the chat throughout as they come to you, and we will get to them later. Also, we are recorded. For those of you who weren't here in the beginning, we are recording today, so feel free to take breaks when you need them. You can always go back and watch the video. So as some of you may already know, in addition to TDL's consulting, training, and community advisory offerings, the digital preservation services at TDL include distributed digital preservation infrastructure hosting and support. As you can see here, our digital preservation service members ingest their unique collections and archives through TDL's DuraCloud into whichever combination of our 3 storage environments suits the needs of their content. We are a node of the Chronopolis Digital Preservation Network, which is based at University of California, San Diego. And Chronopolis is our non-commercial storage option. It's both geographically distributed as well as rooted in the cultural heritage community. And we consider Chronopolis our top tier digital preservation option. But other materials may be accommodated by Amazon S3, replicated in Glacier, and monitored and audited by our TDL DuraCloud. We host our own DuraCloud instance for each of our DPS members, and we are involved with the ongoing development of the DuraCloud open source system alongside Lyrasis, its home, and international developers. So far, these TDL partner institutions that you see here on the screen have deposited nearly 50 terabytes into TDL's digital preservation services. That's about 42 in Glacier and just over 8 in Chronopolis. One of our strategic priorities, one of our strategic priorities at TDL over the last several years has been to better integrate digital preservation storage with our other services that we offer. I'll describe 3 of those efforts. First, we have simplified the export of DSpace repository content into DuraCloud for our digital preservation members who are also using TDL's repository hosting service. This replication task suite is a DSpace add-on, which we have adapted for TDL member use with our hosted instances. The RTS provides a set of curation system tasks to assist in performing replication of DSpace contents to other locations via DuraCloud. The DSpace content is packaged by the service in containers known to many of us here as archival information packages, or sometimes we call them APEs if we're specifically fluent in the OAIS functional model. TDL is also undergoing an initiative to preserve all of the research data our partners are depositing and citing in the Texas Data Repository Dataverse. Chronopolis Digital Preservation will help researchers create strong sustainability plans for their data while putting together data management plans and writing grant proposals. Finally, TDL is also working on setting up all of our 75 open journals to replicate across the Public Knowledge Project's private LOCKSS network. LOCKSS is lots of copies, keep stuff safe. This is a free service that we just hadn't taken advantage of before, and will add another benefit for journal editors and managers. I also recently announced 2 exciting developments in TDL member discounts for digital preservation systems. First, we have gathered enough interested TDL partners to offer a 10% discount off of Archivist. Archivist, if you're not familiar, is a subscription service from the Internet Archive that allows institutions to build and preserve collections of born digital content. Through the user-friendly web application, Archivist partners can harvest, catalog, manage, and browse their archived collections. We thank our web archiving interest group for helping us achieve this discount for our membership. We're really excited about it. Another recent development is a partnership with Artifactual Systems to allow our TDL digital preservation service members a significant discount on a hosted, supported Archivematica instance with training and other benefits, including support. Archivematica is a digital preservation workflow management system. You'll hear a bit about it today. It bundles dozens of activities required for digital preservation good practice into a single processing pathway. And then at the end of the Archivematica process, TDL members will have created a sound digital preservation package, again, an APE, or an archival information package, to preserve their valuable and unique digital content using one or more of our TDL digital preservation storage options. Baylor University will be the first TDL member to pilot the service as we work out details and setup, and TDL expects to have the service described, including details about pricing, by the winter or early spring. We know that UTSA is also interested, and when we reach 3 partners, we'll be able to offer an even deeper discount for the supported service. One of the reasons that TDL is a recognized national leader in digital preservation is how we are able to convene our members and facilitate collective action. Our digital preservation and web archiving Texas interest groups both meet quarterly with the goal of sharing resources and strategies, discussing your goals and objectives, strategizing together about how to influence national and international digital preservation efforts, and finding ways to work together to improve digital preservation in the state. Please let us know if you would like to be part of either of these groups, and we'll help you connect. TDL also shares resources on our Digital Preservation Services Wiki, including a useful tool for doing a digital content inventory, which I believe Kaitlyn will talk a bit about doing an inventory like that later. And we also have that tool for setting priorities for your digital preservation goals generally. Also, as members of Ndsa, formerly the National Digital Stewardship Alliance, TDL extends the benefits of membership to all of its members. The Ndsa organizes a global network of collaborative partners to take stewardship action toward 3 primary objectives that align with those of TDL. They identify, communicate, and advocate for the common needs of member institutions. They convene and sustain a national community of practice for digital stewardship, and they provide professional development opportunities for staff at their member organizations. And again, that includes TDL and all its members. TDL has representatives on all of the major Ndsa interest groups, standards, infrastructure, and content, as well as the Leadership Coordinating Committee, which is an elected position. Additionally, TDL contributed to the recent revision of the levels of preservation, resulting in the Levels of Preservation 2.0 and its many supplementary materials. Sorry. The levels, if they're new to you, are a framework created by the Ndsa as a guide for institutions that are managing digital material. The framework basically breaks up the many various and sometimes confusing aspects of digital preservation into 5 easily understood functional areas that can be graded into 4 levels of increasing preservation robustness, creating a visual reference grid that can be used as a checklist. And again, you'll hear more about that later in the panelist presentations as well. Back in 2017, I applied the original Ndsa levels of preservation framework at the state level to observe and magnify Texas institutions' digital preservation efforts and to inspire them to work towards shared goals. To do so, I conducted interviews with 15 Texas Digital Library member institutions who were managing digital material. This slide is actually from a poster, and it illustrates where Texas institutions collectively ranked in the 4-level framework as it existed at the time. As you can see, a few years ago, Texas institutions were doing best in access and information security, but needed some work on managing integrity and content types, as well as some other areas noted here. The work I did on this assessment was essential towards the major contributions we made to the levels of preservation version 2.0. With the recent revision, I hope to do this or something similar again soon. I know the work that we've done in the interim to share resources in Texas and collaborate will show improvement that aligns with how we've seen digital preservation in Texas improve over just a few years. We are about to hear about some awesome digital preservation efforts in Texas. And I'd also like to highlight a few especially significant things Texas institutions have recently been working on together. First, some of you may already be familiar with our IMLS planning grant called Preserving Sensitive Data in Distributed Storage Networks. So although distributed digital preservation, or DDP, services have been offered in the United States for over a decade, no distributed service offering for sensitive data currently exists. As a result, sensitive data in the custody of libraries, health science centers, and archives are at an escalated risk of loss. With our partners at UCSD and Chronopolis, as well as many all over the country and several right here in Texas, including TDL members, we examined the feasibility for a nationwide model for a DDP service that would close the gaps in our current preservation offerings for sensitive data. That report, including next steps, will be published this November after our wrap-up meeting, which is happening so soon, this August. I also want to tell you about our friends at the Woodson Research Center at Rice University, who were part of the excellent OSS ArcFlow project. That project aimed to examine and create workflows to increase the capacity of libraries and archives to curate born digital content using open source software. You can find the resulting guide to documenting born digital workflows, as well as its accompanying video modules on the Educopia website for the project. And again, you'll get these slides, and so you'll have these links in the slides later. Finally, and as an introduction to the fabulous Bethany Scott, University of Houston is undergoing an environmental impact scan of their digital preservation ecosystem. As far as I know, it's the first of its kind in Texas and something we aspire to at TDL. So we'll definitely be following Bethany's lead. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Bethany to tell you about Archivematica Texas and then introduce you to our excellent panelists. Thank you for sharing this space with us today.
Okay, thank you, Courtney, and hello to everyone. I'm Bethany Scott. I'm the Digital Projects Coordinator at the University of Houston, and I am the chair of ATEX, the Archivematica Texas Users Group. I'm so excited to be hosting this webinar today with the support of TDL. But before we get into the presentations, I just wanted to give a quick introduction about ATEX. From our charter, ATEX provides a network of collegial support and inspiration among Archivematica users and an informal forum for discussion and sharing about the Archivematica digital preservation system. Along those lines, we have a Google group for discussion questions and updates about our activities. The link is on the slide here. We also host in-person training and networking events. As an example, about 1.5 years ago, we had Archivematica Camp, where the creators of Archivematica came and gave us a 3-day in-depth crash course in using Archivematica. And we also usually host a meetup at TCDL every year. Unfortunately, canceled this year, but looking forward to seeing everyone in person again in the future. And finally, we are also starting to do online events like this webinar. So on that note, we'll get into some info about our presenters. So first off, thank you to all of the presenters for allowing us to learn from your experiences. First up, Kaitlyn Sisk will discuss UT Southwestern's efforts to establish workflows and incorporate easy-to-use tools to move from level 0 to level 1 on the NDSA levels of preservation. Lauren Goodley will share strategies, opportunities, and constraints faced by the Digital Preservation Working Group, a cross-departmental and cross-discipline team at Texas State University Libraries. She'll discuss communication with stakeholders, documentation, and review the current funding requests for storage and next steps anticipated by the group. And then finally, Shelley Barba will talk about the high and low points of transitioning from a simple in-house preservation workflow to incorporating Archivematica for the preservation of theses and dissertations. And at the end, we will hopefully have a good amount of time for Q&A. So if you have questions that come up during the presentations, put those in the chat and we will be monitoring that and have questions with the presenters at the end. So with that being said, Kaitlyn from UT Southwestern will start us off. If you want to start sharing your screen, Kaitlyn.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Can everybody see everything okay, hopefully?
Looks great, and you sound great.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Courtney. As Bethany said, I'm Kaitlyn Sisk, and I am the digital archivist at UT Southwestern Medical Center. I've been in this position since October of last year, and previous to that, I was the digital archivist at William & Mary Libraries in Virginia. And so just a little bit of context here at UT Southwestern. We are an archives and special collections department of 3. And although previous archivists had worked some on digital preservation in the past, I'm the first person to serve as the full-time digital archivist. So this is really the first opportunity we've had to come up with a more comprehensive digital preservation system. Right now, we don't have an extensive collection of born digital materials, but we're working on collecting. Much of the born digital materials we do have are kind of one-off things like commencement programs or catalogs. And we also do have about 1 terabyte of digital photographs from one of the longtime campus photographers, but that's a project for a different presentation. We've also done some extensive digitization work with images and campus news releases, which is the other kind of category of digital material that I'm tasked with preserving. So before I get too far into my presentation, I want to make an observation about digital preservation based on my limited experience of 3 years in the field. Digital preservation can seem like a really big, unwieldy, abstract, and kind of scary task. And I just want to be honest about that because from talking to other colleagues doing this kind of work, it's really shown me that I think a lot of us are in the same boat. This is my second job out of grad school where I've been tasked with coming up with the digital preservation program from scratch. And sometimes I still kind of feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And when I first started, and even now, I experience a lot of imposter syndrome around digital preservation. I feel like I understand the basics of digital preservation. I know what the OIS reference model is. I know about checksums and file formats and all of that stuff, and that's great. I feel like I know a lot about theoretically what we should be doing, but trying to put that into practice is really difficult, especially if you're starting from scratch, especially if it's only one hat that you wear out of many in your job, and especially if you don't have unlimited resources, which pretty much none of us do. And so it's really hard to find somewhere to start. But I hope that if you take away anything from my presentation, it's that there are some small steps that you can take to get started and kind of like get the momentum going. You don't have to go from 0 to Archivematica overnight. And if you can do that, please share it with me because I'd love to learn. So basically, like if you feel overwhelmed by getting started, you're definitely not alone. So where I started thinking about beginning digital preservation at UT Southwestern was with the newly revised Ndsa Levels of Digital Preservation Matrix, which Courtney has done a very good job of giving an overview for. But just for the couple of people who might have missed it at the beginning, the levels are basically a way to benchmark where you are with digital preservation. I really like the levels because they give me kind of a direction to work towards and slightly more actionable tasks than just kind of like solve all the digital preservation problems. It also provides me with like an accepted method that in the field that I can use to explain how we're progressing with my boss and my boss's boss, who might not know as much about digital preservation. And also, I'm kind of a visual person who loves being able to kind of check tasks off of a list. And while digital preservation is definitely a lot more nuanced than that, the levels kind of provide me with that satisfaction of saying, hey, we've finished that level and I can kind of check it off and try to improve on it. So the other awesome thing about the new levels is that they provided this handy little beautiful color-coded spreadsheet that you can use to monitor your progress. So when I first got to UT Southwestern in October, I created a matrix for myself to gauge where we started. And so this is basically where we were at. It's not even level 1. As you can see, most everything in the level 1 category is red. I also want to note that the levels can be kind of a tricky thing to apply across all of the digital material that you might have in your collection. So for instance, we had digital materials that were saved in 2 places, but not everything was. And so that's why you can see under level 1 storage, have to complete copies in separate locations is yellow, meaning that we were working towards it, but it didn't apply across the board. So once I had a visual representation of where we were, I took a closer look at all of the benchmarks for level 1 across the functional areas and tried to focus on how I could achieve them kind of one by one. So next I'll kind of talk about a few tools and methods that I used to progress us towards being more level 1 compliant. So first and most importantly, when you're starting out with digital preservation, I think it's great to figure out exactly what you've got and where it lives. And in my experience, you might be able to figure out where some things are and what they consist of. But in my last job, I was actually still hearing about digital materials that were saved in various places almost a year after I started my inventory. So it's definitely a start, but it's always going to be a work in progress. So at UT Southwestern, I talked to the archive staff and other people who had been involved with digital material in the libraries to get an idea of what we had, where it came from, and where it lived. And I ended up creating a spreadsheet with all of that information, as well as some basic metadata about like what file formats I was working with and the size of each collection of the materials. We didn't have a ton of digital material that was saved on external storage media like hard drives or floppy disks or CDs. But I think it's also a good idea to inventory that material if you have it and you can. For me, creating a spreadsheet helped me gain better intellectual control over the digital materials that we did have. And just kind of get a sense of how much digital material I was working with, which helped me inform different decisions down the line. When I did this, I made my own spreadsheet, but like Courtney mentioned earlier, there are other resources out there. TDL has a great inventory template that can also help you prioritize like where to focus your efforts on migration or processing, or even to prioritize different resources for digital preservation. So I would definitely check that out if you haven't seen it before. So the next thing I wanted to do was get some metadata with each of the collections of digital material that could live with the actual files. And for that, I started using Data Accessioner. Data Accessioner is free to download, and it combines a lot of other open source tools that you'd normally need to run on a command line, which makes it a lot more accessible for people who might not be comfortable running things from command lines. It's honestly one of my favorite tools because it streamlines a lot of the necessary initial digital preservation steps with a pretty simple to use interface. For each collection of our digital material, I used Data Accessioner to add metadata about pretty much anything that I knew about it. And then when you hit the migrate button, Data Accessioner saves the files in a structure. And then it also records things like file formats and verifies your file formats, creates fixity information, and a lot more stuff. So basically already, just by using Data Accessioner for the material, I kind of jumped from like level 0 to level 2 in the functional areas. And as you can see on the screen, the output of Data Accessioner is an XML file with all of your metadata. And if you're not used to looking at XML, it can be a little bit unwieldy to look at, but once you kind of know what you're looking for, it gets a little bit easier. I personally like to retain this XML file as a record of what the files were before any sort of digital preservation actions happened or processing, so that even if some of the material is weeded or we need to change file formats later down the line for preservation or access, the document shows basically what was there initially. So once I accessioned everything using Data Accessioner, the second thing I wanted to do was ensure that we had at least 2 distinct copies in separate locations. I was lucky that at UT Southwestern, we already had 2 drives that were basically set up and mostly empty and available for me to use for digital preservation. So I made copies of all of our material that lived on both of those drives. But even if you don't already have something or the resources set up, I think trying to find anywhere that you can save 2 copies is super beneficial, even if you're using like your university's cloud drives like OneDrive or Google Drive, or even buying an external hard drive. It doesn't have to be complicated or super pretty. I think that 2 copies is better than 1, which is better than 0 if something happens. And then another thing that I used at this phase was a tool called Bagger. Bagger is a way to package up materials so that over time you can check the validity and the completeness of them. And to me, part of having 2 distinct and complete copies of your material is being able to validate that they are in fact complete. And that's basically what Bagger can do for you. I don't want to get too in the weeds, but Bagger uses a specification called Bagit that essentially wraps everything up in a nice little package. And it creates files that help you validate it if you need to validate it later. I also like it because it provides a more human readable manifest with your digital materials, so that if you're looking at the materials where they're saved, you can open that file and actually be able to read the metadata that you've added to it. There is a final tool that I use during this step called Teracopy, which is for Windows. I think that there's a Mac equivalent that's pretty much the same, not by the same person, but it's not free. But basically, Teracopy is a program that gives you notifications when something that you're moving or copying on your computer fails for some reason. And honestly, I don't know if it's overkill to do that, but again, it just kind of helps reassure me that if I am having to copy or move files from different locations, that nothing is changing with those files. So lastly, once I had gathered all of the digital material and had 2 complete copies in separate locations, I wanted to make sure that the material stayed constant over time. Some of the materials I might not be able to touch for a while because of other processing priorities, and I wanted to make sure that nothing changed or went wrong until I can go back and actually process it. I also wanted a more automated way to check the fixity of the material. Bagger is one way that I could have done it, but it would have been extremely time consuming because I would have to use the Bagger interface and manually run checks on literally everything that we have. So I decided to use a program called Fixity by AV Preserve. Fixity runs fixity checks on materials that you specify, and you can set a schedule for it. So for each grouping of digital material that we had, I set up Fixity to run a monthly Fixity check that runs on different days of the month. Once Fixity runs, you can have it send you an email confirming what it finds, whether any of the files have been moved or changed or deleted. Again, this tool is pretty easy and straightforward to install. The only issue I personally had was setting up the email settings to send the email to myself, but I was able to get our IT person to help me out, and after that it's run really smoothly. There are some limitations for Fixity because I found that it takes a really long time to run on large collections. So I've had to play around a little bit with how much data that it can process in like one sitting or one given day. So this using Fixity may not be a super sustainable system for me to use forever, but right now it kind of serves the purposes of making sure that all of our material isn't changing over time. So just to kind of recap, after implementing these tools, where have we ended up? So this is, again, what we looked like before I started. We were basically at level 0, mostly a lot of red on the graph, or on the chart, but some yellow. And then after, this is what our assessment looks like now. We're at like a level 1.5-ish. Although the levels build somewhat upon each other, it's definitely possible to be green in one area in a higher level and then red in a lower level, as you can see like in our integrity part of the chart, and that's okay. Honestly, it really makes me feel satisfied seeing the difference between the first matrix and the second one. And that's another reason why I really like using the levels of preservation. To me, sometimes digital preservation seems like a never-ending task. There's always going to be different ways that you can do things, better ways that you can do things, and new technologies in the field. But being able to look at your progress over time, I think is really valuable, not just to me, but also to people higher up than me who need to like justify the resources and even my position to do this preservation work. So from here, there are a couple of things that I want to do to continue leveling up our digital preservation. I'm still working on having a copy of the materials offsite. Our IT specifications at UT Southwestern make this a little bit complicated, especially because we potentially have material that has HIPAA-related information, so that limits where we're allowed to save things, but the conversations are definitely happening with that. Also, like I mentioned, I like using Fixity, but I don't think it'll be sustainable long-term. And so I'd like to look at other ways that I can run Fixity checks and be able to log them better than just having an email. Another big thing is processing. To me, processing is like a huge part of digital preservation. For one, unprocessed digital materials take up storage space that you may not necessarily need at the end once you've done weeding and stuff like that. But also, I think making your digital material accessible is the best way to ensure its long-term accessibility. Because you can't just put it on a shelf, as we know, with temperature control and just kind of leave it. The more we're able to use it, the more often we're able to check up on it and make sure that things are, still good and the same and openable. Another thing on my bucket list is to implement Archivematica. Right now, I don't do a lot of file format migrations just because I haven't really gotten to the processing stage for most things, and it's just not super sustainable at this point. When I do migrate, it's a manual task and is kind of done out of necessity when it's a file format that I just can't open. So being able to implement Archivematica would be able to automate a lot of what I'm doing and what I need to do. And then finally, because of the pandemic and continuing to work from home, I've been able to work on a digital preservation policy that just outlines our commitments and processes when it comes to digital preservation. I'm a huge believer in documentation, so I think that this will be a great step for us once it's finalized. So that's basically how we went from level 0 to level 1.5-ish and the levels of preservation. And I hope that some of these tools might be helpful for you to play around with if you're just getting started with digital preservation. So thank you.
It's so quiet. Should I start talking?
You sound great.
Okay. This is Lauren. I'm getting this set up. Spoiler on that first slide. Let me see. Okay, looking good. So I guess I'm gonna hide the chat. Okay, so my name's Lauren Goodley. I work at the Wittliff Collections at Texas State University in San Marcos, and that was fun. Kaitlyn doing stuff, doing all these things. I'm gonna switch gears a little bit and start my timer and talk about doing things a different way, which, you know, every place is different, every situation is different, and zoom out a little bit. I'm not going to talk about any tools or tasks or I can't think of the word, take a 1,000-foot view or whatever, 10,000-foot view of what the Digital Preservation Working Group has done since I think 2014 or 2015. So I've been the chair and the co-chair of that group since then. So I'm gonna just talk through this case study. I don't think I'm gonna talk too much about lessons learned because not to be too corny, but that was kind of the process of us coming together as a group, and you know, doing it faster may or may not have been better. So I might just leave that, the whole lessons learned a bit. I'm happy to take questions, of course, at the end. I am going to follow, I'm not sure how clear I made this in my slides. So Ndsa McGovern, whom I love and who had a lot to do with OAIS and making that an international standard and yada yada, also wrote a group of action plans, and they haven't really been published anywhere, but I found them really useful as a guide. So that's what I'm going to be talking about that we followed. Okay. So, oh, and we're going to talk about hobbits because why not? It'll get less dorky, but the thing that has been in the front of my mind thinking and doing digital preservation has been the people side of things. I'm really grateful for Jeannie, who is no longer at this institution. I almost said no longer with us, but she's alive and happy somewhere. She wrote this part of the kind of elevator speech or one sheet that we wrote for the digital preservation policy. And I really liked the way, and this was for, you know, non-digital preservation stakeholders. So this was to explain to people what we were doing. And I liked that she said that the system will have people-centric and technology-centric components. I have found that stakeholders and resource managers often really want to throw money at things, and sometimes that's useful, but sometimes you just need like time spent on a thing, you know, like, so the people has whatever. Okay. And looking through these slides, I also noticed that we were smart enough to use terms that were really usable by everybody. So to say files and assets, I would just say files, but it was important when talking to certain resource managers to use assets, that was a meaningful thing. And then alive and viable, I thought those were funny words and maybe not digital preservation words, but again, are meaningful to certain other groups that we wanted to buy in. So the first thing that we did was write this digital preservation policy, and I'm not going to go through it, but I do want to drop it in the chat because it's really hard to find. We just had to put it somewhere on our website so we could link to it, and it's not useful that way. So that was, and the outline for that was in these action plans by Ndsa McGovern. So they follow OAIS. We were good on that. I felt good about following Ndsa. let's keep going. Habits are small. I'm coming to terms with where Texas State is in the bigger picture. And so this is where we are. I don't know, somewhere in the middle. We're not, you know, UT, A&M with doing a lot of research in this area. So it's kind of up to us in certain ways. But this is where I am. We were right at about 40,000 students. We're moving on up and getting some more doctoral programs. I don't know what that high research activity really means, but we're in people talk about us being an emerging research university, and moving towards becoming a tier 1. That's the goal. The other goal is a membership in ARL, which is pending. They're looking at the application right now. And I think the other thing of interest is that Texas State is a Hispanic serving institution. I did not find the numbers. I know that white students are in the minority here, less than 50%, and there's also a lot of first-year students here, so first-generation students, the first in their families to go to university. So what I'm gonna hopefully eventually talk about today is also really scalable, so it doesn't, you don't have to have IT, we didn't when we started, you don't have to have people doing lots of research. You can, you know, work with what you got. So yeah, we did work with what we had. And one of the first things I learned, I'm just gonna make this about Nancy Montgomery. One of the first things I learned about from her management workshop, digital preservation management workshop, is that you're gonna need a team. And I went to this workshop in 2011, so things have changed since then. We hire actual digital archivists now, which is exciting, but especially then and still now for me, that task is spread out among other tasks and among multiple people. So having a team is really important, and it has seemed to work really well for us, having this digital preservation working group. We are able to leverage the various skills and expertise, whether that's Jeannie knowing what words will be meaningful to other people, or our sysadmin person reminding us not to use the word copy because people use that in multiple ways. I just kind of like working on a team. I think that's really fun, and it takes a lot of pressure off of me for knowing everything about everything. Yeah, I don't know why I put that there, just that the technology is one part of it that I appreciate, keeping it kind of people-centered. That's kind of the heart of it. The cons are that the various skills and expertise mean that you spend a lot of time communicating and making sure you know what a copy means and what everybody means by different terms. So that has taken a lot of time, frankly, but I think been really, really valuable to this group. And oh, I guess I put that I just like working in a group, but not everybody does. So I try to be aware of that. So just to point out, like Bethany said, this is a pretty diverse group as far as the library goes. So that has a manuscript archivist, which is myself. There's now two university archivists. There's a librarian who does the institutional repository, the head of digital and web services, and then the head of the imaging and digitization lab, and then a programmer. So that's our group of people, and we do have different things we bring to the table. Our head of digital and web services serves as a really good liaison with what we call TR, but is our IT storage. And then the head of the digitization lab is really keen on, making sure we have nice pretty metadata when things get created. And then our programmer, we just depend on for everything. So it's a good group. We did not have a programmer or a digitization lab when we started this group. So, and there have been some turnover in our staff, but the group has continued. I'm about halfway done. Yay. So it's iterative. So like people were saying, the digital preservation is never, you know, like done. You just get better at it bit by bit. So the other thing that I wanted to share was this, oops, doesn't want me to, this digital preservation outreach and education curriculum, which is no longer being offered or maintained by the Library of Congress, but the amazing Wayback Machine is available to us. So there you go. And so that's where I learned these 6 steps, which these are not the steps, I'm just describing them, which is that they're simple, they're iterative, they're scalable. And then also important to this group, I think, they're field agnostic. They can work for digital materials in libraries, archives, or museums, and they're tool agnostic. So they are still useful, even though we're using very different tools from when these were developed. This training was developed, I think, around 2010 again. So our little 6 steps, which I could also spend a lot of time on it, but I won't. But they should seem a little obvious once they're laid out this way. You want to identify the digital materials that you have, select for storage, then store them, protect that storage, manage the materials, and provide access to them. So we saw that Kaitlyn used a lot of tools to do these things. And that's one way to do it. The other way is with a team. I really like these steps too because they are jargon free and, like I said, field agnostic. So we don't use appraisal, things like that, just a little less jargony, which is also good for communicating to outside stakeholders. It's a really low bar to entry. So depending on who is doing this, you can, you know, start a Word doc with, or an Excel sheet with, you know, the different servers and what is on them. It can start really at whatever level you are tool-wise. And then you can just scale up from there as you get better or are better or whatever works for you. I was gonna have a feat on my slide here because I was like, oh yeah, 1 step at a time, but like, do not Google Hobbit feet, it's weird, just don't. So just, anyways, we get the whole, that was the thing there. Quests are long. I wish I knew which slide this was, but I think we're getting towards the end. Quests are long. So the path that we have taken was that the Digital Preservation Working Group as a thing was conceived at TCDL, which I did in the wrong order. That Ray, who was on this call, and I were at TCDL, and I think University of Houston had gone through this action plan, and I was like, wow, that seems, you know, doable. And Ray was like, do it. So it was nice to have a director level support from the beginning. So that same year, the University Archivist and I organized it, made a charter. So this was a really bottoms up or grassroots or whatever thing that we knew we needed a group to do this, that nobody was going to be able to do digital preservation on their own in their little siloed areas of the university library. So looking back for this, it was interesting that we began the discussion of Archivematica and distributed storage way back in 2015. And that's funny because we've been talking about it, and we just got our request for distributed storage via TDL was just approved. So that's exciting. And I'm not ashamed that it took 5 years. But what we started with was, I guess it took us a couple years. It probably took us a year to like figure out who we were and what we were talking about and what we wanted to do and where we wanted to go. And then through 2016, we worked on this digital preservation policy and just worked through it and worked through it and worked through it until we were all unanimous about what we were doing. More recently, we were able to actually implement Archivematica, and then we work on it as we can. We finally, not finally, but we did our first budget request was this past year. So all of this was labor, basically. We did a budget request just now for a really small amount to put 2 terabytes of AIPs in distributed storage next year. So that's exciting. I'm happy to note that. So all this time we were meeting twice a month, usually. We were building communications with TR, who thought they had it handled, IT, who, you know, no fault of anyone's own, but thought that all our files were completely safe and we didn't need to be doing any of this work, and that the landscape has changed, that TDL is offering different things. There's lots of great new tools. Things have been changing internally and externally, so, and internally to our institution. So I'm inspired by Bilbo and his long quest with his friends and how long it took to make the movie. I was also happy to hear, and I remember this from time to time, that I didn't look up his name, I'm sorry, dude, but from the person who was hired at the National Holocaust Museum to manage digital preservation there. He had a background in IT, and he said it took him 5 years to get up to speed with this field. And so I like to hear that because it reminds me that, you know, it's not obvious and that there is an onboarding and a learning curve. What did we just do? Quests are long. Oh yeah, and they're never over. There's always a part 2. So I had to put a horrible screenshotted OIS map on here, mostly to point out this preservation planning, which is always ongoing, and the administration, which is always ongoing, and management, I guess. So it's not, like Kaitlyn said, something that you put on a shelf and walk away from. Now that we have our action plan and we have some funds for distributed storage, I think what we'll probably do next is keep making the AIPs to put in that storage, and also probably revisit the document, the digital preservation policy, to see what has changed in 5 years, if we need to update it at all. One thing is that we included the general libraries. We realized that there are items that are maybe not included in locks, that there's just a lot more digital assets in the general libraries. And I'm excited because the university archivists who were just hired this year, I think, which is a weird time to start a new job, but I guess it always is. I'm really pleased that they are on our team. They are both new graduates, so there'll be lots of new information. Just that feels like a really nice new well to draw from. This will always be iterative. We'll always be looking at the tools and best practices, and we'll always be doing preservation planning. As I said, y'all are all my friends now, and that's a happy thing, and this is where I am, and I'm really grateful for the community. So I think I'm gonna stop, and thank you so much for listening. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now and also stop talking. Thank you so much, I appreciate it. Shelley's gonna, it looks like, start screen sharing, and then we'll be on to our next situation. Ooh, I see it.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm hoping people can hear me, and if you can't, please pipe in, or if something's not going right. I've had weird luck with online presentations.
You sound great.
Thank you. I'll take it. So I've just been so pleased watching my fellow panelists talk about their programs and what they have been doing, and I feel really honored to kind of come here in third of to talk about Texas Tech University and our digital preservation history and what we've been trying to do in getting to Archivematica. So the theme that I had to structure this narrative in, because I'm very much about narratives, is about planting trees. And the internet tells me that it is a Chinese proverb of the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. And a similar vein is that the best time to get your digital preservation strategy all planned out and perfect is at the beginning of your digitization process. But the second best time would be honestly just as soon as you can, wherever that could be based on your resources and what you have at your institution. So about Texas Tech, let's see, where do I click? There we go. Texas Tech started accepting digital-born ETDs in 2004 with a pilot program, and then fully expanded in 2005. We also, in 2006, the next year after that, really expanded and started digitizing our legacy collection of theses and dissertations at the time. And the first 5 to 6 years of this process, we were solely focused on creation of these and providing access to these materials. As Courtney pointed out in her slides about Texas, we were green on that, getting access to these works. Digital preservation at that time was discussed. I see it in the documentation of minutes that were kept and other documentation that was written, but it was always regaled to, we'll figure it out at a later time. And that went on for about 5 or 6 years as it goes. So we just have all of these files growing, getting about, Tech averages about 1,000, almost 1,000 ETDs a year coming in. At that time it was a little bit less, but we were digitizing around 3,000 to 4,000 a month from our legacy collection. So just tons and tons of information coming out. And you see the little clock there, it's ticking from that. And what happened, of course, is you have an emergency, something goes wrong. So by 2011, we got to a breaking point for us where we had some errors that were conducted, and some of our most vulnerable digital files were damaged or perhaps completely lost due to not paying attention to digital preservation in this way. And we realized at that time, once we realized what was happening, because it also took a while to realize it, that we could not continue without some type of preservation plan going forward. So starting about 2012 now, we developed a dark archive and an in-house filing system based on WOX principles, and really swung the other way as an institution, from not really worrying about preservation to becoming extremely paranoid that we were going to lose something. And in that, we kept everything, absolutely everything, including all working files of items that were digitized. I'm talking raw TIFFs, cropped TIFFs, JPEGs, and then the PDF of these dissertations, and also other digital collections we were doing at the time. I'm mainly talking today about ETDs because that's what I'm interested in, but we were also doing special collection digitization or access digitization for things like microfilm, and we just kept keeping everything and everything. It just grew and grew and grew. In 2013, going on the timeline, Heidi Winkler, some of y'all may know her, was brought on to our department as a digital preservation librarian, whose sole work was in managing these files and paying attention to these things that had not been paid attention to for now about 10 years. Like, we had kind of started, but it was just a lot of work. Also around that time, as things were developing across the state and with TDL, our department became more involved with the Digital Preservation Network and Hati Trust, and rightly so. So we have these things that we're like, yes, we want to make more copies of them, cover our bases, but now it's really starting to cost us actual money. Like, money, everything costs money, but money. And rightly, Heidi did an audit of our storage at this time, and we realized through her work and her suggestions that we needed a paradigm shift, that our kind of like blanket preservation policies weren't very applicable in such a large scale as what we were doing, and what we needed was a more nuanced approach. And so we started giving more heft and weight to things that were more valuable or more fragile, I think is a better word to use there with that. Our unique born digital items, where we had this one copy of a PDF a student gave us, needed more attention and space than a title where we had up to three physical copies of that work on the shelf, and then we had digitized it. Those are different, and we needed to treat it different, and especially with limited resources, time and space, and the money that goes into the time and space, that we needed to shift. And so keeping these more unique, born digital, we also had like fragile scans of items where they were getting to a point where they couldn't be handled anymore without continually taking damage, and we needed a scan to preserve that kind of the text of it. That keeping those archive files and really paying attention to them was a better use than trying to do everything at once and not doing very good at it. We call this the getting real part of our digital preservation time, and trying to find the middle where it wasn't too little digital preservation of just ignoring it and assuming it'll be okay in the future, and not too much of almost hoarding things blindly and without reason. Really set up for us to have our first flirtation with Archivematica in 2016. Seems like such a long time ago now, doesn't it? But the big problem that happened for us, well, we struggled. It was a struggle in 2016. A couple of factors. We were hosting Archivematica ourselves on the kind of like a test program. It was just like a little thing maybe like 2 or 3 people were doing. And we were somewhat blindly trying to use it. And really the big part. So we're figuring out how to host stuff. We're figuring out how to use this program. But the big part was our in-house system that we had set up now 5 years previous from this point did not align with Archivematica or like a bagging system. We were trees. We were a digital preservation thing, but we were not the right kind of trees. Our collections were ever growing, and especially with the theses and dissertations. As I said, we're always adding more to that collection. And so the idea of it being like, okay, this is done and it's bagged and now it's on the shelf or we can check it, did not align with our understanding of what the collection was and how to digitally preserve it. So unfortunately, after a few kind of attempts with it, this pilot fizzled out. And we were like, well, Archivematica perhaps is not for us because we couldn't figure it out at that time. Luckily, 2 years later, the stars aligned a little bit better. The environment had changed, and our department was excited to try Archivematica again. We had grown our skills in not only like hosting and understanding like systems requirements, but ATEX was offering a training camp, as mentioned earlier, in November of 2018. My schedule aligned perfectly, so I attended that, and it was transformative in many ways to be able to connect with other people also dealing with these issues, but also to have a focused time to really learn a system and how it works, what it's about, and get down to that nitty-gritty of it. It was really, really great. Like, I can't stress that enough. And I remember going back to my hotel there at University of Houston and started writing out a plan of what we would need to do in order to get to the place so we could get to an Archivematica and integrate it into our process. A part of my going to the Archivematica camp, of being able to go, was I had to promise that when I came back, I'd be giving presentations to explain why it was worth tech's time to send me down there. And so I actually gave multiple presentations of way more people were interested in it than I would ever have assumed, or maybe it was just they liked not having to do their work for a time and coming just to hear me talk. Oh, that sounded really conceited. I didn't mean it like that. They wanted to learn more about Archivematica. And so I gave multiple presentations to the library explaining not only Archivematica itself, but about digital preservation and why it was important that the library go forward with that. We had this plan, and in wanting to use it for everything, we first knew that we had to prove it with a smaller system. And what could be more smaller than all of our ETDs, which is around 22,000 of these, most of them now vulnerable, digitally born, unique items that we had a lot of, so we could do lots of kinds of different tests with different preservation through Archivematica with the ETDs. And this here is a copy of a slide from my presentation at Texas Tech University, where I had put out the plan, and it's so simplistic, like very easily of, oh, you develop a new workflow, done, and you set it up, done. That is not how it goes. There's actually a lot more to it, and but in kind of an overarching view, when you're speaking to a lot of people like at your library, having these more concrete kind of steps helps not to becoming overwhelmed, like helps them not to become overwhelmed, the idea of how much work digital preservation actually is. And we felt like a difference between our first attempt in 2016 and now our new attempt in what would be 2019 was to get more buy-in from the library, to get to the part where we could talk about Archivematica and talk about digital preservation, and it's not, oh, that's the thing Shelley does, or that's the thing Digital Resources does, but it'd be a part of the language, much like circulation or ILL is. I'm aware of it and know how it works, even though it's not a part of my job duties. So it was important to get this buy-in. Another thing that was important for us is kind of to take the scary part of it being called Archivematica away. Our special collection archivists were very, very, very wary of this program, and it was really, I did extra presentations and talks with them and roundtable discussions about how this wasn't replacing archives in general, and it wasn't replacing them as archivists, that it was really about digital archiving and about getting digital preservation in a good place for us with our files. The other big part of our kind of like second attempt at this was we had shifted in how we viewed our collections. We had these large collections that never stopped growing. We had one just called books. And so if anyone requested a digitization of a book that then we put online, it just went in the books collection. And that's ever going, that never stops. ETDs, again, never stops. The metadata changes, falls as well. And instead, we realized we could have sub-collections. And it sounds so simple now, but really when we figured that out, it was such a, oh, of course, duh, hat goes on the head, moment for us of realizing that our access collections do not have to be reflected in how we preserve things. And so we could take our ETD collection and cut it down to semesters. That would be a more manageable chunk. We could say, yes, these are all of the titles from May 2020. Here they are. They're all put together with the 8th. It's great. So we're going into 2019. We have this kind of plan. It takes a couple of months to set up things like setting up Archivematica, getting server space, getting permission set up, all of this kind of like nitty-gritty things, where it's actually a lot more politics and talking with people, explaining why it's important. And these are the kind of parts that I feel like we don't really talk about that much in digital preservation. It's just like, it's a lot of talking to people to say, this is a good idea. We should be doing this. And then having to say that multiple times over and over again. So 2019, it's going forward. And for us, then we had some elements on our campus beyond our control that forced us to pause the project. And I can't say I wasn't disappointed, but we're like, it's just a pause, it's not a quit. And our department came back together January of 2020 to plan out our projects for the calendar year. And Archivematica was put almost at the very top of the list. Like, we had a lot of interest. People were still talking about it from those outreach from the previous year. And we were very excited. Chris Starcher and I were very excited to say yes to presenting at TCDL 2020 on this panel about our bumps through 2019 and 2016, but how we were getting on track and getting it going and doing this pilot program. We would make it work in 2020. We know where this is going. Then March came, and March said, hang on a minute. And it's actually been many minutes now that we've kind of been hanging on. However, we have not given up yet. While we have had special challenges and diversions due to the current pandemic situation and how we've had to divert our attention to some other online access issues, we still have been able to continue prepping our ETD files of gathering them in folders, cross-referencing with the grad school list to make sure we have everything for our Archivematica processing, hopefully starting in the fall. All fingers crossed on that one. We know that this is important in the development of our digital preservation strategy. It's always going, it's always evolving. And with this, I would just really encourage you not to give up on wherever you are with your digital preservation strategy. And it's with those trees and thinking about the trees. Trees take a long time. Technically, I guess we've been doing this 16 years, and it's ever evolving, it's ever changing. The environment on that tree affects how the tree grows. And so it's important to be good stewards and curators of that. So I really just encourage you with that, of any bumps and difficulties you have. I think a lot of people have those difficulties and bumps as well. with that, I have one bonus because I hear all the applause and I love it. And so I'm going to give you just like the slightest encore about our digital preservation and trying to get Archivematica, especially about our ETDs. And that's about our digital preservation outreach. So I mentioned like giving presentations to people at my library, explaining things, explaining it again. And since 2017, Heidi Winkler and I have also really pushed to try to educate faculty and students about digital preservation issues. We've had really good success, I feel, with workshops, some that have been hosted by the library and some that have been hosted by the grad school, where we offer best practices and tools for individuals with their personal research files. And a good thing is we have been able to continue doing that during the lockdown, work from home, social distance time of doing Zoom presentations, doing individual consultations, of really helping students, especially grad students, with their research at the beginning, practice these good, keeping lots of copies in different places, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for that encore, and I am now at the end of my presentation. I have to figure out how to stop.
Bethany, you've got the floor.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much to all of our presenters. I just wanted to say I'm so impressed with the work that you all are doing. I loved hearing about it, and I am really proud to be a part of this community doing digital preservation work in Texas. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I have just a couple to like get us started out. Shelley, you were mentioning, you know, about how it took you a while to get buy-in from different people and departments in the library. And so I'm curious if you have any tips about how you were able to get buy-in. And I guess this could also go for all of our presenters as well.
Sure, here. Oh, I'm still on video. Okay. A big part of our getting buy-in was just helping educate. And so with that presentation of making it a part of the conversation. And so people who had the power to allot us resources, or that they would understand what it is, of why digital preservation was important, and then why this particular tool like would address these problems. And isn't that so much easier than us trying to do it on our own? Having time studies, having our own experience with losing files really helps to visualize for them why this is good and how to get buy-in.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, awesome.
Let's see. I guess I will maybe go with some kind of general questions for all the presenters. I am curious to hear what was the biggest challenge for digital preservation at your institution, and or kind of what would you change about the process that you've gone through? You know, I feel like there were a lot of similarities between the presentations, but also kind of some differences about your individual institutions. So curious to hear about that.
I guess I'll start. Something that I didn't mention in the presentation is that UT Southwestern archives in general is kind of still just getting started with like actual collecting efforts. And so I think one of the big challenges with digital preservation is the recognition on my part that all of this digital material is being created on campus already. And we're still working on building the relationships and the connections with people to, one, just help inform like how they can better manage their files, also how we can eventually hopefully get those files into the archives. And so I think like a big part of a job as a digital archivist or anybody who's working with digital material is being able to build those relationships. And it's definitely a process, and it's a long process. So yeah, that's one thing I would mention.
I'm going to unmute myself and say something if I can, which is that I'm going to turn it around and say what's worked really well has been having a team and knowing that the 5 or 6 other people on the digital preservation working group with me, that we're all in the same place. We have the same message. We can talk to our various supervisors and directors or whoever is in our realm. And just that we're all on the same page and agree on the next steps and the direction that we're going in. That's been really useful for me, because there is a lot of, well, anyway, yeah, that's been useful for me.
Awesome, thank you, Lauren.
Ooh, someone wants to hear about your environmental impact scan, and I want to too.
Okay, well, I will definitely talk about that. I do want to, though, make sure to cover the other questions about the presentations. So I think these, there's 2 questions for Shelley, I think. So first up, what type of visualization or other demonstration have you all found most helpful in ensuring buy-in and keeping stakeholders informed? I guess maybe that could go for everyone too.
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. Unfortunately, the sad answer is that when we had our situation in 2011 and ETDs were deleted through a human error of misunderstanding what a preservation copy is, and the number that just really gets to those people is we don't know how many were deleted. We have no clue. We don't know what they are. There was no documentation on that. And just honestly, the blank screen of not being able to show that, terrifying. It's like a scary movie. The monsters are always scariest when you don't know what it looks like. And so having that as kind of our foundation has really helped a lot. And we have to have something. Let's make it good.
Yeah, I think if there is, you know, a file or multiple files that are just lost forever, that is a really quick way to illustrate the importance of managing things, you know, and having someone actively responsible for doing that. So, and then the second question, Shelley, is in using Archivematica for ETD preservation, do you run into any PDF validation issues with author-supplied files? And if yes, do you make corrections to IR publication or just to preservation copies?
That is a very excellent question. And so we are still very, very in the beginning of using Archivematica in that way. But looking at our documentation, if it were to come up, we would probably replace the file in the IR as well. We view our IR very much as an access copy and not as some kind of like stasis of this is the official ETD, because that's what the graduate school does, and they have their own preservation for it. And we want to make sure that our files are as good as possible that they can be. So probably in that sense, we would replace it.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. So as Courtney mentioned in the chat, we can stay about 5 more minutes or so. So if there are any more questions, please feel free to keep them coming. I'll give a little info about the environmental sustainability research that Courtney mentioned. So I was curious to find out the carbon footprint and, you know, kind of the broader environmental sustainability of our digital preservation program at UH, and to kind of take that as a baseline to see if we could improve, you know, make our program greener. And so I started out by working with our system administrator to get an overview of all of our hardware and, you know, the servers and all the different pieces of equipment that are used for digital preservation and access. And then I looked at the energy expenditures for all of that equipment. That was something I have never analyzed or had experience with before. And we have an Office of Sustainability on campus and a sustainability coordinator who was amazingly helpful in helping me figure out like how to even, you know, figure out the energy expenditure numbers. And so from that we have, you know, a baseline info of this is how much energy we're using for our equipment, and these are the sources of energy that we're using for that equipment on campus. And so hopefully in the future I'll be able to do some further analysis on like if there's changes that we might do to our policies or procedures that would be, represent an improvement in our energy expenditure. So hopefully that wasn't too long or too boring, but excited to work on it more. And if you have questions or ideas for me, please feel free to reach out anytime. Okay, so it looks like we are, you know, about wrapping up. I just wanted to say again, thank you everybody for attending. Thank you to all our presenters and of course TDL as well for helping us make this a reality. Courtney, do we need any last wrap up or anything?
No, but I just want to echo what you just said. This was so good, y'all. Thank you so much for doing this, and thanks for everyone who stayed with us for the full session. And I'll let you know when the closed caption recording is available. We forgot to turn it on during the session today, but we'll get it done and we'll make sure it's shared with you. Leah, do you want to add anything before we shut down?
Not anything that I didn't already put in chat, but next week, excuse me, right around this time, we are going to have our TDL Awards ceremony that some people on this call helped put together, and it's going to be really fun, and I hope that everyone can join us next week. So check out.
Bye, everybody.
Yes, I was doing that happy thank you, not waving goodbye. I was going to say goodbye already. I was doing the yay ASL cheer.